This is a Channel 7 Eyewitness News special event. Vote 09, the official New York City Democratic primary mayoral debate. Brought to you in partnership with the New York City Campaign Finance Board, Univision, 1010 Wins, and the League of Women Voters of New York City. Now, from the Channel 7 studios, your moderator, Eyewitness News anchor, Bill Witter.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the final official Democratic Party debate, the primary debate for mayor of New York City. You are watching it live on WABC TV, Channel 7. First, a welcome to the two candidates tonight, Tony Avella and Bill Thompson. Gentlemen, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
We look forward to a fascinating and exciting debate. Joining me also are Eyewitness News political reporter Dave Evans, Univision anchor Antonio Martinez, 1010 Wins senior correspondent Stan Brooks, and in the Eyewitness newsroom with email questions from you, Eyewitness News reporter Nina Pineda. We invite you to send your email questions to us at 7online.com. That is our website. Some official business to get to before we get down to business of this debate. The debate is administered by the New York City Campaign Finance Board. It's a nonpartisan, independent city agency that oversees the campaign finance program, which amplifies the impact of New Yorkers' small contributions by matching them with public funds. Eligible candidates who join this program are required to take part in today's debate. The CFB also provides public disclosure of campaign finances, enforces the city's Campaign Finance Act, and provides voters with important information about the candidates for city office through the New York City Voter Guide, and we thank them for sponsoring this debate. The order of the candidates appear on stage tonight was determined by random drawing. Here are the rules. The candidates will each have 45 seconds to answer questions, 30 seconds for follow-up questions and rebuttals. And gentlemen, we urge you to stick to your times. That's part of my job, and I will try to be polite when I remind you. Okay, we're going to begin with Tony Avella. And as a preamble, this is no small job, the mayor of New York City. It controls a budget of $60 billion. That's the third largest non-federal government budget, right behind the budgets of California and New York State. And the mayor is the titular boss of 250,000 people. The city is an enormous operation. The stakes of running it are high, and the challenges, as we know, gentlemen, are daunting. The city is now facing a $5 billion deficit at least, perhaps growing more. Unemployment more than 9.5% and growing. We'll start with you, Mr. Avella. What do you think you're qualified? Why do you think you're qualified to be mayor and guide this city through this economic crisis?
Well, first of all, I had the opportunity to work for two mayors during my career, both mayors Ed Koch and David Dinkins. So I saw them up close, and I also worked with them to address some of these issues. I've also been a member of the City Council for the past 8 years, and prior to that, I served on my own community board for 9 years. And also, at the same time, as a community activist. I've had the experience of seeing government from both sides, both being in it and being a community activist at the same time. I think that gives me a unique perspective that most politicians do not have. Working in the community and still working in government at the same time, it gives me the insight to see what government should be doing, what it isn't doing, and what the community needs and deserves. Okay, Mr. Avella.
Mr. Avella. Mr. Thompson, the same question to you. Why do you think you're qualified to be mayor?
Well, my whole background, if you look, I've spent my entire life in public service in New York City. Special Assistant and Chief of Staff to United States Congressman, Deputy Borough President in Brooklyn, President or member and President of the New York City Board of Education, Comptroller, the second highest citywide elected official for the last 8 years. I'm a lifelong New Yorker, product of a public school teacher and a judge. My whole life has been focused on public service, and I've had the opportunity to serve the people of New York City for almost my entire adult life. So all of that prepares me and puts me in position to be able to be the next mayor of the city of New York.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you for also staying on time. We're going to begin our questioning now with our political reporter for Eyewitness News, Dave Evans. Dave?
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Thompson, you've been city controller now for about 8 years, almost 8 years, and as you're well aware, the New York Times recently reported that under your watch, the city's pension fund did not perform as well. It performed much worse than other similarly sized public pensions across the country. At the same time, your office tripled the number of money managers working for you. Can you explain now why the pension fund did not do very well, performed so poorly? And also, can you convince New Yorkers that you can manage the city given this track record?
Well, first, our public pension funds have performed well. Compared to other public pension funds around the country, we have done well. The New York Times chose one index to take a look at. Multiple indexes are how we measure, and New York City has done well compared to the others. If you look at the biggest public pension funds, CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York State Common, we have outperformed those public pension funds, particularly in the last year where things have been even tougher. We've diversified our portfolio. We've tried to spread things out, which accounts for more managers being hired. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So we've diversified things, we've spread them out, and we've done a good job for the members of our pension funds and the people of New York City.
Just as a follow-up, though, that same report said that you accepted, though, campaign contributions from money managers who you hired. Do you really think it's right to go ahead and accept money from the people who are going to be doing work for your office?
Well, the first thing is I participate in campaign finance. It's probably the most transparent and open public financing system in the country. Also, there's a clear division in my office between the professional investment staff and any fundraising that's done. They have no idea. Also, our public pension funds are managed, or at least they're chaired, by the mayor's people. 4 of the 5 boards are managed or chaired by the mayor's people. So each and every investment decision is voted on by the members of the pension funds. No one person can manipulate it. So there is a very clear division between that, and campaign contributions have and do not influence any investment in my office. There is no pay to play in my office.
Mr. Avella, you care to respond?
Well, I actually think this is a huge scandal in his office. You know, as the New York Times reported, he has received $500,000 from these pension managers, which he increased 3-fold in his administration. 2 of his employees who set up this system then left, formed their own company, was given tens of millions of dollars to invest in pension funds, then got $1 to $2 million worth of fees, and then kicked back money to his campaign. I think this is a huge scandal, and it calls into question how he would operate as mayor. And it's not just the pension scandal, it's a history of mismanagement. Remember, he was the president of the Board of Education, and we changed the entire system from the Board of Education to the Department of Education, where the mayor could have control, even though I don't agree with total mayoral control. Why did we do that? Because the Board of Education was a disgrace. So these are issues that the people of the city have to evaluate when they go and vote on Tuesday.
Mr. Thompson, I'm going to give you a chance to respond. It may be transparent, but is it the right thing?
It is, as I said, there's a clear division between and. When we look at our public pension, when we look at our 5 pension systems, all of them have outside consultants. All of them have separate and independent boards of trustees. Each and every investment is voted on by those independent boards. So there's no pay to play in my office. And, as I said, the investments have nothing. We've increased the number of investments in the city of New York, the number of money managers. Why? Because it's prudent, because it makes sense, because you spread out risk. And in these tough times, it has served the people of New York City well. So I'll come to the Board of Education in a minute, because I'd like to get back to that also.
And we'll get to it as well.
I'm sure. But no, in my office, I'm proud of the work that we've done in spreading out risk, in diversifying the portfolio, in serving the people of New York City.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Univision anchor Antonio Martinez to Mr. Avella.
Thank you, Mr. Avella. You're a very vocal critic for overdevelopment and private developers. Yet, in the council, you helped push through the deal of the city with the Yankee Stadium to build a new stadium for the Yankee team. The deal gave the team $800 million in tax breaks and subsidies, and also gave away 22 acres of city land.
Absolutely correct.
Was the deal good for the city? Can you tell us how many jobs and business have been created because of this deal?
The deal is not good for the city. You know, unfortunately, when you're in the council, sometimes you can't always vote no. And I actually have one of the highest voting records voting no in the council. The only other person who beats me is Charles Barron. I was actually trying to negotiate as chairman of the zoning committee on that project. And I had raised a number of issues, one of which was a real commitment from the MTA to build the Metro North station. And after they made a commitment, the administration got involved, and so did the Speaker's office. I felt it incumbent, if they resolved one of the issues that I brought up, to vote for it. It would have been ridiculous of me to bring up the issue and then say, well, after you resolve this, I'm still not going to vote for it. It is a bad deal because the city the Yankees have failed to, to fulfill their part of the commitments. And yes, you bring up an important part of the fact that the city is subsidizing both the Yankees and Met stadiums.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Avella. That's it for the time. Mr. Thompson, your response?
This is another Mike Bloomberg giveaway boondoggle. He's continued to support big developers and those like the Yankees while shortchanging the people of this city. As we look at the Yankee Stadium deal, what was supposed to have occurred, what was supposed to have happened as far as parkland, as far as development, has been a faint promise for the people of the Bronx. They've been lied to. So this is another example of a Mike Bloomberg giveaway, and we've seen that for the last 8 years. That's what the Yankee Stadium deal has been.
Would you have voted for it? Have you been a city councilman?
Well, I've opposed a big part of this, a big piece of this Yankee Stadium deal, and have had a vote on the IDA and voted no. I thought that we saw an excessive amount of bonding capacity go there. I just thought this was a bad deal for the people of New York City.
Is there anything either of you could do as mayor, in 30 seconds, I'd like you to respond, to make this deal better for the people of New York? Mr. Avella?
Well, obviously, you could go back to the Yankees and say, why are you not living up to your commitments? And take a serious look at the subsidies that the city's providing. Is it legal? One of the things that I fought consistently as a member of the city council is overdevelopment, as was mentioned. My opponent is taking huge amounts of money from the real estate industry. If elected, there's going to be no change in how the administration runs the city of New York in terms of letting the real estate industry control the agenda. And whether it's the Yankees or the Mets, I am the only candidate for mayor that is going to regulate the real estate industry in terms of overdevelopment, in terms of how they deal with tenants, and how they deal with small business.
All right, 30-second response, Mr. Thompson.
Let's be clear. It's time to go back to the Yankees and say, geez, this was not a good deal for the city of New York. We need you to do more for New York. We need you to do more for the parks. We need you to do more for revenue. That deal, as a matter of fact, it wasn't a bad enough deal in the beginning. The Bloomberg administration went back again and gave away parking and gave away revenue from other things to be able to buy a luxury box, which they then gave back again. Okay. It's time to go back to the Yankees and say we need a better deal for the people of New York City.
Thank you both for your answers. Next question from 1010 Wins senior correspondent Stan Brooks. Stan?
Thank you, Bill. Mr. Thompson, if you are elected, what is the first thing you would do as mayor?
I think the first, get rid of all the commissioners who work for Mike Bloomberg. I think the most important thing is to bring a whole new team in with a different perspective, with a view that looks to work and fight for middle-class and working New Yorkers. It looks to do things like, we talk about development, fair development, smart development across the city of New York. Try and make this a more affordable city for the people of it. That's what needs to be done first. That first act, bring a whole new team in, people who really represent the city of New York.
Mr. Avella?
Well, the first thing I would do is fire the Chancellor of the Board of Education, the Department of Education, Joe Klein, and followed by the Fire Commissioner, followed by the Commissioner of the Department of Transportation, followed by the Commissioner of the Department of Consumer Affairs. There is a huge breakdown in the city of New York how the city agencies are operating, and it's Mike Bloomberg and the commissioners he's hired. Those are the first things. Obviously, the next thing I do is tell the real estate industry their days of controlling the agenda in this city are over.
Okay, both of you, thank you very much. We have been taking in your email questions all week to our website, 7online.com. Our Eyewitness News reporter, Nina Pineda, has been monitoring them, going through them. She's in the newsroom with one of your questions. Nina?
And Bill, we have a lot of great questions coming in already, so let's get right to it. Welcome to both candidates to the interactive portion of our debate, where our viewers at home get a chance to log onto our website, the number 7online.com. They can click right here and submit a question directly to you, and that is what Patrick Warner from Manhattan has already done. He asked, do you prefer lower taxes to spur an economic recovery, or do you prefer higher taxes? With the city facing a huge deficit, gentlemen, do you prefer cutting service or raising taxes? Let's go first to Mr. Avella.
I've been a consistent opponent of raising taxes. I think we can raise taxes on the rich over $500,000. But the lower income, working families, middle income families, we need to lower taxes. I voted against the 2 property tax increases that was proposed by the mayor and approved by the city council. I voted against both of them. I voted against the increase in the sales tax. When you reduce taxes, people put that money back into the economy. They purchase goods. Manufacturers then have to hire more people to make those goods. You stir the economy when you lower taxes. And I think we can do that without cutting services if we find alternative sources of revenue.
Okay, Mr. Thompson?
I've advocated raising taxes on those who make $500,000 a year or more by about a little more than 0.6%, and those making $1 million a year or more by 1%. That would generate an additional $1 billion a year for the city of New York. We have to tighten our belts, but I watched the sales tax increase. I oppose that. The Bloomberg administration, Mike Bloomberg, again, placing the burden on the backs of working and middle-class New Yorkers was wrong, and we need to stop that. So the rich need to pay their fair share of taxes right now. That's one way to close the budget gap in the city.
Is there any tax either one of you would consider never raising? Any budget service never cutting?
Well, what we should do is bring back the commuter tax. I mean, that would help a lot. I mean, and that was eliminated because of a purely political move years ago. And it's actually the Democratic Party that did it, working with the Republicans in the state legislature. That could amount to $450 million a year. We should be bringing that back.
This is, for those who are not aware of the commuter tax, a tax on people who work in New York City but do not live in New York City. Mr. Thompson?
I think public safety. I think as we look at where we're at with firehouses, we don't need to close firehouses, and I would say that we need to make sure that that doesn't occur. Public safety issues, I think that we have to be very careful in not lowering the floor there and maintaining a safe level, both police and fire. I think that's important for the future of New York City.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. We want to move now to job creation, and we have been out with our Eyewitness News cameras in the communities asking questions. Let's listen to one question from Staten Island about jobs.
What are you going to do about the people that's losing their jobs nowadays? The economy is so hard. Things are so hard now. What are you going to do about people who really need public assistance, but they can't get on it?
Mr. Thompson, we'll start with you. The city's unemployment rate over 9.5%. Many people think it's going to go to 10% by year's end. What's your plan to get New Yorkers back to work? Well,
a few things. And first, the unemployment rate may be continuing to skyrocket in New York City, but in African-American communities, it's almost 15%. In Hispanic communities, it is over 9%, and it continues to go up. It is a crisis in the city of New York. First, we need to look at growth areas in the city of New York, small businesses across New York. We need to work and create access to capital for those small businesses so that they can grow. We need to focus on those who are self-employed in New York City. They're almost 20% of the workforce these days, and there's been no change and no adjustment. Everyone will talk about the need for biotech, but green-collar jobs. If we're going to be a greener city, we should start to produce those things in New York. And then we need to be creative also. When you look at things like the tax credit for the film industry, if we uncap that, if we eliminated the sunset, New York City could be the film capital of the world. We need to be creative in New York City to create the jobs that our people need.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Avella, your plan to get New Yorkers back to work?
Well, first of all, I think it's very interesting that my opponent mentioned about loan capital and loans for small business. That's exactly what Mike Bloomberg is proposing, and it's completely wrong. The one thing that we need to do to improve small business in this city, which is on the verge of extinction, is commercial rent control. And there's actually a piece of legislation in the council for mediation when the leases go up, and it's called the Small Business Survivor Act. I'm a prime sponsor of it. It was introduced by Councilmember Robert Jackson. And by the way, my opponent hasn't supported this proposal as of yet. This would provide mediation. We have small business owners whose lease may be $6,000 a month, and when the lease is up, the business owner tells them it's $46,000 a month. That has to be stopped. As mayor, I'm going to work with the city council. We need commercial rent control. That is the first thing that has to be done to protect small business.
Would there be a magic equation to just get people back to work? A rebuttal, Mr. Thompson?
Well, access to capital for small businesses. If you speak to small businesses, they will tell you they need access to capital to be able to grow. New York City also needs, we do billions of dollars a year in goods and services. We need to help feed those small businesses also and give them an opportunity to do business with the city of New York. And then finally, I've proposed retail retention zones that would start to protect the flavor in neighborhoods of local retail businesses so those businesses wouldn't be pushed out of the neighborhoods that they're in.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you both. We want to move on to the next round of questions. We'll begin with Dave Evans.
Mr. Avella, you've touched on this a little bit, but if you could name three, in your opinion, three failures of Mayor Bloomberg as his 8 years in office during his term as mayor, and also what do you see as three of his most successful plans or ideas?
Well, let me take the latter first. I mean, the one thing he deserves some credit for is setting up the 311 system. It was an idea that had been around for decades, and he deserves credit for setting it up. I think, on the other hand, that's one of the failures as well, because the 311 system is good for information, But if you make a complaint, forget it. It's like a black hole. The complaint goes in, nothing ever comes out. The system has to be improved so that when you make a complaint, you get follow-up, and that doesn't really happen now. Obviously, the Department of Education is a failure. I don't care what his numbers are in terms of the math and reading scores going up. All we're doing is teaching to the test. You ask any teacher in the educational system, and they will tell you, we are not educating our kids. We're actually lowering the standards for for students to graduate to the next level. I wouldn't say it's dumbing down, but it's making it easier to pass. When I went to school, you needed 55%. Now you need like 37% to be able to graduate.
Okay, Mr. Avella, thank you. Mr. Thompson.
The three greatest failures. Term limits definitely has got to be number one. Ignoring the people of New York City and a vote that they had taken twice before. Ignoring the democratic process and going around the voters to the city council. That is number one on the part of the mayor. Mega development and the failure of all the mega projects that Mike Bloomberg has moved forward to the exclusion of small businesses across the city of New York. That's probably number two. The Department of Education is the third. And as we saw last week, where they rated every elementary school, 97% of the elementary schools and middle schools in New York City, either an A or a B. I've termed that almost a visit to Fantasy Island, or at least it is just not real. Those, I would say, are the three greatest failures of Mike Bloomberg.
If you could, you don't have to name three, but what would you say is successful that he's done? The
smoking ban. I would say that the smoking ban is probably his biggest success.
And has led, he claims, to a decrease in smoking in New York City.
Well, I don't know whether it's led to a decrease, but that has been at least eliminating smoking in public places.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you. Antonio Martinez, you're next with the question.
Thank you, Bill. This is a question for Mr. Thompson. You pretty much touched on the subject on the small businesses. Univision 41 cameras also went out on the street to find out what are the concerns of the Spanish-speaking voters. Here's what Mr. Jose Baez has to say about the economy. He's from Washington Heights.
Here in Washington Heights on 181st Street, there is a lot of business owners who are suffering the consequences of the bad economy. What can you do for them? Because the landlords are increasing their rents dramatically.
You already touched on the subject, but I want you to be more specific. And before that, there's a recent study that shows that larger retailers like McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts are really thriving in New York City, while mom-and-pop stores are forced to close their doors. What is specific? You mentioned about the access to capital. There's several agencies like the New York Community Media Alliance and ProPublica that said that access to capital, especially for minority businesses, African Americans, Hispanics, is zero right now.
Correct.
What would you do specifically?
We can create pools of capital, working with banks and others, supervised or being worked in conjunction with the city of New York to create that access to capital for those small businesses. I talk about retail retention zones. I think that's a good idea. That would start to protect small businesses with the use of zoning against big box stores coming into neighborhoods and pushing them out. I also think that it is important we look at the sales tax that the Bloomberg administration just put into place. Sales tax increase of 0.5%. That works against retail businesses and small businesses, and we have to understand that. Other things, as I said, giving other things, perhaps tax breaks to some landlords for maintaining rent at a certain level. That's another possibility. So there are a number of different things that need to be done to help to grow small businesses. They're the lifeblood of our communities. Half the people employed in the city of New York work in small businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Avella?
Well, first of all, I want to state again for the record, because the two studies that I've seen conducted by Latino business organizations show that capital only is response for about 7% of the people they interviewed. And these are two recent studies. The overwhelming issue is the escalating rent. You can give them all the capital in the world. If they can't afford the rent, they're going out of business. And that's why you have to address that issue first. That was the #1 response for almost 1,000 small bodegas and Hispanic businesses. That has to be done first. I am also the only elected official in the city of New York to write and bring to the attention of the U.S. attorneys the extortion that is going on of small businesses in this city, where landlords are extorting money from small business owners, money under the table, in other words, to renew their lease or sell their business.
Okay, Mr. Avella. Thank you very much, Mr. Avella. Stan Brooks, the next question about health care.
Mr. Avella, immediately after this debate, President Obama will go before Congress to outline his health care reform. While we wait for Congress to act, do you have a plan to cover uninsured New Yorkers? And should New York City hospital emergency rooms continue to be the doctor's offices for the poor and the uneducated?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a very interesting question. And obviously, preventive care is key. When people wait to go to the hospital because they don't have insurance or they don't have their own private doctor, that costs the taxpayers money. So what we need to do is improve health care in the city, provide more clinics. I mean, Staten Island, for example, doesn't have a city hospital. None. They have a couple of private hospitals, but they do not have a city hospital. I mean, that is a disgrace. We need to get more help from the state, Albany, and Washington. This is not a task that the city can take on alone because of the huge amount of money that's involved. One of the things that both of us did was stand in front of the two hospitals that recently closed in Queens. And I actually came up with a suggestion that, to the mayor and the governor, because we were getting stimulus money to HAC, the Health and Hospitals Corporation, to use that money to save those two hospitals. And I got to tell you, the mayor and the governor sat by and let them close. That was a disgrace.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Thompson?
Well, the first thing, and you know, I'm looking forward to hearing the president later this evening. He has taken real risk in providing leadership in moving this issue forward, and he should be applauded. In New York City, and one of the things is we hope that by the end of the year that legislation will be approved. That's the timetable he's set on it. Here in New York City, I've always been a strong advocate for preventive primary care. A string of clinics across the city of New York that would say to people, let's keep you out of emergency rooms and letting those emergency rooms be your doctor. Let's go there to get a checkup. Go there to bring your child to have an early diagnosis of something. Go in and have preventive care. Done a lot of work in disparities in health. Based on race, based on poverty and income, people die earlier in New York City because of a number of different things. We need to prevent that. So New York City needs to do more in that area. The Bloomberg administration hasn't. It's something we need to do.
Thank you both very much. I'd like to remind both candidates, try to stick to the time. We want a lot of questions to get to. Before we get to another hot button issue, I want to just ask you a personal question. So take off your politician's hat.
If that's possible.
That's possible. What's the one thing voters would be surprised to learn about each of you? We'll start with you, Mr. Avella.
Well, the New York Times did an interview about me, the fact that I drive myself around, I don't have an entourage, and I can tell you, I've gotten the most positive reaction from that alone, and the fact that I gave up my parking permit. Some people say, why'd you give that up? And because I think, you know, elected officials shouldn't have a perk.
Do you drive yourself around as mayor?
Yeah, I drive myself around.
Would you as mayor?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if the police had an issue with it in terms of security, I'd have to talk to them.
Mr. Thompson,
but I believe you should do.
Thank you. Same question to you. What would voters be surprised to learn about you?
How much of a battle it is not to gain weight all the time. I mean, you know, I think we all can identify with, you know, difficult hours and a number of things. And, you know, I haven't done a great job, but I've done an adequate job, and it really is hard in keeping the pounds off. It's very difficult.
You both look pretty good. Thank you very much.
Faking it well. Bigger suits.
More of your email questions to our website, 7online.com. Nina Pineda up in our newsroom with that. Nina?
And Bill, we're getting so many interesting questions from outside the 5 boroughs and also all around the 5 boroughs by our viewers who are submitting their questions on 7online.com directly to the candidates. And let's go first to a question from Brooklyn. Seamus Campbell wants to know, and he's going to ask Mr. Bill Thompson, what are your plans to reform the MTA? Even as fares go up, we are constantly hearing about service cuts. As mayor, Mr. Thompson, what would you do to improve subway and bus services?
Well, the first thing is to stand up and use the 4 votes that the mayor has on the MTA. This mayor has done nothing, as people have sat there and voted for every fare increase and every service reduction. I've stood up and tried to fight for fair share from Albany. That's one of the first things that needs to happen. We need to go to Albany to get our fair share for New York City Transit. We continue to be shortchanged. The federal government also. They have been out of the business of mass transit. We need to go to Washington. It is time to look around the country and understand that we are being shortchanged and that riders pay an inordinate amount into the fare box. We need to provide leadership. I wrote the president a few months ago to ask for additional help in operating capital for the MTA so we don't have to continue to dig deeper in our pockets. Using the commuter tax also would put more money in to mass transit. That needs to be done. But, and I'll be very quick, but we need to improve service, and that's the one thing. People are being shortchanged. More express buses, more express bus lanes, better transit. That needs to be done. So whether we break up the MTA or increase the amount of money that goes there, New York City needs to have better.
Mr. Avella?
Well, actually, he just mentioned what I've been trying to do in the City Council. I've introduced legislation asking the state legislature to break up the MTA. I think that is the only way we're finally going to get control and improve service. I believe we're the only major metropolitan city in this country that doesn't have control of its own buses and subways. That's ridiculous. Do you know, when the city of New York gave up control back in the 40s, we gave the subway system, all of its infrastructure, to the state, to the MTA, without getting a dime back. We need to get it back. We need to get control, because right now we have no say on the MTA board. The other thing we need to do is replace the 2nd Avenue subway, which is being built, with a light rail system. Right now, the 2nd Avenue subway is eating up the entire capital budget of the MTA, $5 billion. We could institute a light rail system, which would save the transportation needs of that community at 1/10 of the cost, and use all of that money to fund other transportation systems in the rest of the city.
The 2nd Avenue subway is already partly dug underground at great expense and great disruption to some people. What would you propose doing to that stuff?
Well, I think we should stop it, because, you know, it's already behind schedule. It's 8 years behind schedule. $5 billion is going into this.
Just pave it over?
Well, no, we could use it to wherever the train goes. You could stop and do the light rail system.
On top of it?
Yeah.
Mr. Thompson, would you agree with that?
The 2nd Avenue subway is something that people have waited for decades. So no, I'm not in favor of stopping the 2nd Avenue subway, and if anything, I've talked about a full-built 2nd Avenue subway, one that takes into account the original vision that goes into the Bronx also. We have a need to improve mass transit for those who use it. The 2nd Avenue subway is one way.
Even if it takes to the year 2017?
It continues to take longer and longer and longer. They're in the ground. The dollars have been allocated. They're moving forward, but we need to look for additional dollars to be able to move that into the Bronx also.
Thank you, gentlemen. We want to move to the question of lower Manhattan and development down there. Slow is not an exaggeration. We sent our Eyewitness News cameras out to get someone's opinion.
My husband and I live in the downtown area, just a couple of blocks east of Ground Zero. We have been watching now for 9 years as the work switches from one to another, from one design to another, and we want to know when the politicians are finally going to get together and give us something at that site and finish that hole.
It's been 9 years on Friday, the anniversary of the, 8 years on Friday. 8 years on Friday, the anniversary of the terror attacks. Mr. Avella, as mayor, what would you do to break this logjam and the stalemate?
Well, you know, this clearly is a national disgrace. I mean, it's a victory for the terrorists that we haven't, you know, built the memorial, and said to the terrorists that we cannot be defeated. It's interesting that Mike Bloomberg has used the process of eminent domain throughout the entire city to take people's homes, to take people's businesses. Yet here's a situation where he could go out after the private developer and use eminent domain for a good reason, because obviously something has to break the logjam. As mayor, I'm going to say to the private developer, listen, you either move now or we're moving to take this property and the city's going to take it over. And the same thing with the Port Authority. This has to stop. And the mayor should have taken a leading role a long time ago. But this should be one of the first things that the next mayor does, and hopefully it's not Mike Bloomberg.
Mr. Thompson, in the middle of a recession, how do you build more office space?
Well, you have to always prepare for the future. And we look at Ground Zero and what has not occurred down there. And that's one thing that Tony and I will agree on. It's a national disgrace. What's happened there is a question of failed leadership on the part of the mayor. It's a question of stepping up, saying to the developer, saying to the Port Authority, saying to the governors of New York State and New Jersey, I want to be in charge of this. I want to take responsibility for this. This is in New York City. It is something that reminds the people of New York each and every day of the terrorist attack. We need to do something there. It's a question of failed leadership, and the next mayor needs to exert real leadership in this regard.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Next question from Dave Evans.
Bill, if we could just for a quick follow-up, especially to Mr. Thompson. Earlier on the question about MTA, you said that the mayor had done nothing on the MTA during his tenure. What do you call the extension of the 7 line? The city's paying for that.
That's the only thing that he's done, and that's one of the few cases.
It's a $2 billion program that the city's paying for. The MTA's not.
No, they're not. The city has put money into the 7 extension that many thought shouldn't have occurred. That's the only thing that the mayor's done, and that's not on the MTA board. That is separate and aside from the MTA board. I did say that his representatives have sat on that board and approved every fare increase and every service reduction while many of us were out there fighting against it. The only thing he has done is to spend city dollars on the extension of the 7, and many believe that above ground rail would have made more sense rather than, I believe, what is it, 2 stops on the 7 at the cost of $1 billion.
Quick response, Mr. Avella.
Well, I thought he said before that he would, in terms of the light rail issue, that he wanted to go ahead with the 2nd Avenue subway. Now, I thought I just heard above ground, which would be light rail. So I'm a little bit confused with his answers, to be perfectly honest. But the mayor has done some good things with the MTA, but the overall issue is that we do not have control on the MTA board.
Okay. Back on track then just for a second, if you can. Gentrification, as we've all heard recently, is a big issue in a lot of different neighborhoods. Let's go ahead and listen to then one voter from Brooklyn and their concern.
There seems to be more and more like young people looking for cheap places to live, but the people that have been, the communities that have been living there for a long time seem to be misplaced or moved out of these areas that they lived for a long time. So gentrification is definitely a concern I have living in Brooklyn.
And this is a question for Mr. Thompson. As mayor, how can you assure people that they are not priced out of their neighborhoods, especially during these tough economic times?
Well, we need to build more. We need to understand that housing right now is a crisis situation in New York City. I've talked about a 21st century Mitchell-Lama program. We need to look to do that. We've done it in the past. We need to do that again. Rent stabilization. It's the mayor appoints all the members of the Rent Stabilization Board. I'd like to appoint the members and let them understand that their first priority would be tenants, not landlords, to be able to start to protect tenants. We also need to use zoning and tax breaks and other things to create more moderate and middle income and low income housing all across the city of New York. That's how we start to slow gentrification down, by building with construction, by building across the city of New York, not just luxury housing, as we've seen under a Bloomberg administration, housing for all New Yorkers. Treat it like the crisis that it is. That's how we slow down gentrification.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Avella?
Well, I first have to mention that the real estate industry has controlled the agenda in the city for decades. And that's because they donate the most amount of money to elected officials. Let's be real about this. Let's tell the truth. My opponent, if he would get elected, he's taking huge amounts of money from the real estate industry. Nothing is going to change. The real estate industry has to be regulated. You have to build real affordable housing. You do that by changing the formula by which the city does affordable housing and making it so that the people in their own neighborhood get to benefit. The city has to do capital dollars to do affordable housing. But most importantly, we have to have real community-based planning, not let the developers of this city control the agenda. I want to give people in their own neighborhood the ability to plan. They will do the job, not the developers. And that's how you start to address these issues.
Thank you, Mr. Avella. Antonio?
Excuse me, do I get a quick response on that, the 30-second?
If you'd like. We have a lot of things that come
and I understand.
If you feel it's important, then go ahead.
I do.
Well, then if you let him do that, then I want the ability to go back at another
30 seconds,
time.
but we have a lot of important issues. Go ahead, Mr. Thompson.
If there is a candidate of the big developers in the city of New York and the real estate industry, it's Mike Bloomberg, and they've supported him for the last 8 years. Number two, when it comes to tenants and tenants' rights, whether it's the Rent Stabilization Board, where 2 out of the last 3 years I've argued for a 0% increase, or standing with tenants in Mitchell-Lama housing to say you can't force them out, or standing with tenants all across the city of New York. I've been there and stood with tenants repeatedly. If the landlords have contributed and in the hopes of getting anything, it's been a poor investment on their part with me.
Mr. Avella?
I would just say then, I give you a commitment right here. I want to see if you commit to that. I've committed to eliminating the Rent Guidelines Board because they're a landlord-dominated agency. Will you commit to, if you're the next mayor, to eliminate that board?
I'm going to commit to putting people on the board, on the rent stabilization board, to stand up for the tenants. That's what you need to do. It's not eliminate. Then how are you going to turn around and make sure?
You're the mayor. You would have the power to give it to the Housing and Preservation and Development, and have the authority to do it.
I'll have the authority to appoint pro-tenant representatives on the rent stabilization board. That's how you get things done.
There's only 2 tenant representatives on there with the current makeup. That's the way the board is made up. That's why the board has to be eliminated.
The mayor gets to nominate, gets to appoint all of the members. If you appoint pro-tenant members, they're going to stand up and fight for tenants. That's how to get real change.
Thank you both. Obviously, a lot of people interested in your answers. Antonio, your question.
We're going to switch gears now. Education. Again, one of our cameras went out on the street to find out what the people are concerned about education. We have here the lady, it's Carmen Larimore. I have a question for Mr. Avella.
Education is an issue because in our Hispanic communities, the schools have very poor programs for our children. How can they contribute to implement a better education for these students?
Mr. Avella, how would you close the gap between high-performing schools in wealthier neighborhoods and schools in poorer areas?
Well, I think we have to make sure that every school gets the proper funding. What I'd like to do is, if I'm elected with the support of New Yorkers, the day after election, is start to have real conversations with the stakeholders in the educational system, the teachers and the parents. Build a system that we can all be proud of, and then go down to the really local level and see what every school really needs. You know, every politician gets up and says education is a priority, yet it's never properly funded. The mayor has had control for 8 years. Every year he cuts the education budget and relies on the city council to put the money back. I would have a different relationship with the city council. We're not going to cut the education budget, and we're going to work with every local school to make sure that they get the resources that they need and cut through the bureaucracy. And again, listen to the teachers. My favorite expression is nobody knows their block better than the people who live there, and that's why I believe in community-based planning, but nobody knows the educational system better than the people who live it each and every day, and the teachers and the parents, and why the heck aren't we listening to them?
Thank you, Mr. Avella. Mr. Thompson, in 45 seconds.
I think it's important that we focus on literacy. I did an audit earlier today that pointed out how dollars are being diverted from smaller class size. The Campaign for Fiscal Equity lawsuit that sent money to the city of New York. Early grade, smaller class size, making sure more time on task with our students, extended day, longer year if necessary, Saturday class for a number of our students who are struggling, more time on task, letting teachers teach again. Also, changing expectations and aligning resources, perhaps a pre-K through 16 system, where we tie things together for the first time in the history. That's how we make real educational improvement. And again, letting teachers teach. Enough of just focus on standardized testing. We need to have focus on comprehension and improving that for all students.
Let's continue that theme with Stan Brooks. Stan?
Before becoming controller, Mr. Thompson, you were president of the Board of Education for 5 years. Almost everybody agrees now that the schools are doing a lot better under mayoral control. If you were elected mayor, how would you change the system? What would you install?
Well, I think that as we talk about things being better, I'm proud of the work that I did when I was at the Board of Education as its president. I led a reform agenda, got involved when others ran away. Under my leadership, we changed and got rid of decentralization and put somebody in charge of the system for the first time in decades, the chancellor. It led and paved the way for mayoral control. As I pointed out, some of the things under mayoral control. First, we need to involve the parents again in the school system. They've been shut out for the last 8 years under Mike Bloomberg. That would be helpful. I also talked, as I said, about a pre-K through 16 system, starting to align resources better, changing expectations of our students, each student understanding that they have a future and where they're going to go, and stopping this teaching to the test, and focusing on comprehension. Those are some of the things I would do, and also put a chancellor in charge who understands education for a change. That's important also.
If you took over, would you fire Joel Klein?
I think Joel Klein should be fired now, but I think it's important to the next chancellor to come into the school system who has an educational background. I think the time has run out on the businessman chancellor right now. We need to put an educator back in charge of the system.
Okay, Mr. Avella, you already answered the question earlier about Mr. Klein. Your answer about education.
Well, first of all, I'm glad to hear him say publicly that he would fire Joe Klein, because I've been saying that for 2.5 years. In earlier debates, he actually didn't say that. It's only lately that he has. And if I heard correctly, he said under his administration, when he was president of the Board of Education, that led to mayoral control. Yeah, it led to mayoral control because you did such a terrible job. I mean, let's be a little realistic here. Everybody knew how bad the Board of Education was. That's why the mayor and every elected official went up to Albany and said, we need a change. I think let's tell the truth here.
And that's exactly what we're going to do. As I said, when I got involved in the education system, 32 school districts with superintendents hired by local boards. We changed that. I changed that under my leadership, and reading and math scores went up for the first time in years. It paved the way for mayoral control, something that I testified in favor of in front of the city council and other places, because I thought that was the next step and something that needed to be done. So no, I'm not going to pat myself on the back, but the work that was done while I was at the education system helped to improve the system. I'm proud of the work that was done there, and it helped to pave the way for mayoral control right now.
Mr. Allen?
I disagree.
Okay. Thank you both.
And I think most people in the city will disagree.
Let's go back up to our newsroom where Nina Pineda has been taking your email questions. Nina?
And Bill, viewers are really taking advantage of the chance to interact directly with the candidates on our website. Our next question comes to us from the Bronx. Marcus Oliveria asks, allegations of police abuse is a growing issue in urban communities. For example, stop and frisk discrepancies. What will you do to ensure city residents are not unfairly targeted? A New York Civil Liberties Union analysis of NYPD stop and frisk data found that 90% of those stopped were people of color. The NYPD has consistently denied that its stop and frisk strategy involves any racial profiling. Let's go to Mr. Avella. Do you think the stop and frisk policy, Mr. Avella, is working, or should it be stopped?
I've already publicly said that I would stop it. I think it is having a dangerous effect, and I think there is racial profiling going on. I compliment the police each and every day. I think they do a great job. I think this is mismanagement from the top. I would definitely get rid of it. This is part of the issues that I see, a larger picture of the issues I see, whether it's women's rights, civil liberties, or freedom of speech or freedom of assembly, that have been under attack, not only under this administration, but the previous administration. One of the things I've committed to do as mayor is to be the first mayor that appoints a deputy mayor for human rights. I want to have somebody who looks at these issues each and every day and reports directly as mayor. Because if in this city we don't have our own individual rights protected, then you know something, we don't have anything.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I believe that first, we have to protect civil liberties. And stop and frisk right now, whether it is being misused or abused, people right now feel targeted. Communities of color in the city of New York feel unfairly singled out. So I'm not going to say that we should eliminate stop and frisk. I do say that we need to provide greater oversight, greater controls. You hear from police officers, and a number of them, that they don't believe that, or they feel that they're being pushed to stop a certain number of people. I think that's wrong. We need to make sure it is used as a policing tool, but used only when it is necessary. So we need to rein it in. It is on pace right now for a record year in stop and frisk. Over 600,000 people are going to be stopped at the current pace. That's wrong.
Thank you,
we
Mr.
need
Thompson.
to make sure that that's controlled.
I'm going to call an audible here because we have a lot of questions left and not much time to do it. And we're going to ask each candidate to limit their questions to answers to 30 seconds. I'm going to start. These are complicated. I know. I'm going to start with a complicated one.
So far.
How would you describe the state of race relations right now in the city of New York? We'll start with you, Mr. Thompson.
I think the state of racial relations have improved in New York City. I think a lot of it has happened after September 11th, when we understood that we are one city and only as strong as perhaps our neighbors. At the same point, people feel that there are inequities in the city of New York, that when it comes to employment and a number of other places, they're being unfairly treated. I think we have to work each and every day. And it's one of the reasons that, I've run for office, and I'm running to be mayor of the city of New York, to try and bring that sense of change and hope to New York City.
Mr. Adler?
I think there's a serious issue with race relations in the city of New York, without question. It's an underlying tension, whether it's affordable housing or, the stop and frisk. There are a lot of issues here that are just not being addressed, and it's really unfortunately, not being, covered in the press. But it's a serious issue, and that's why I say we need to have a deputy mayor for human rights. I think this is something that has to be looked at, examined, and addressed at the highest level of city government.
Mr. Avella, thank you. Dave Evans?
As we've all seen this past year, a lot of voters, I think, were very angry when Mayor Bloomberg pushed through an extension of term limits and changed the rules without a vote of the people. Let's go ahead and listen to what one voter has to say about this issue from Queens.
And as far as all the candidates running for mayor, I would like to see a pledge to restore our charter system, that we have term limits for mayor.
So, question to Mr. Avella. Do you support restoring the two-term limit for mayor?
Absolutely. I mean, we all came in on term limits. As far as I'm concerned, we made a covenant with the people 8 years and out. And I think Mike Bloomberg dealt a fatal blow to democracy in this city by overturning it without going back to the people in another referendum. People voted twice. The message could not have been clearer. On the floor of the city council during the debate on this bill, I publicly chastised my city council colleagues, the 29 of them who voted for this, saying they should all be ashamed of themselves and they should all be voted out of office for voting for that extension. It is an absolute disgrace. I made a decision back in 2005 when there was talk about doing this in the city council that I would not serve the third term if they overturned term limits without going back to the people.
Mr. Thompson?
I think that Mike Bloomberg's going behind the backs of the voters and ignoring them, in his own words, was disgraceful. It was one of the low moments for democracy in the city of New York. I believe it should go back to the voters. Again, I advocated then, and as a matter of fact, I was part of the lawsuit afterward that tried to overturn what had happened. I'd said then that I didn't take a position whether it should be 2 terms or 3 terms. The people of New York City had spoken before. It should go back to them. Let them tell the elected officials in the city of New York, should it be 2 terms or 3 terms? That's what democracy is about.
And thanks for sticking to the new time limits. Antonio.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to talk about immigration now. Mr. Avella, this is to Mr. Thompson. 3 million of the city's 8 million residents are immigrants. According to the Immigration Office of the City of New York, approximately 500,000 of those are undocumented. Many of the towns around New York City now are receiving money, federal money, to train their officers to they train them to enforce immigration laws. What is your policy toward undocumented immigrants?
Well, first, as the grandson of immigrants who came here from St. Kitts and Nevis in the 1917, I believe in immigration. I think that right now New York City, also I've advocated on the federal government for legislation that would create a pathway to citizenship for immigrants here. New York City can't afford to join the ranks of Suffolk County and others as we become an anti-immigrant city. Immigration has been good for New York City. We should not turn our backs on immigrants in New York City and engage in what they've done in other places. So we should not turn people in. We should not provide information that allow people to be deported. That would be wrong, and I'm against that.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr.
I also am a second generation. Both my parents went through, both my grandparents went through, on both sides, went through Ellis Island. I would continue the executive order that every mayor has signed since Ed Koch, which basically says any undocumented alien can go to any city agency and apply for services without fear of being turned in regarding their status. That needs to be done. That's smart for people, that's smart for taxpayers. This country was made up of immigrants. I like to call them new Americans. And we need to do more to help them become citizens at the same time and learn English, make sure that the ESL classes are funded completely.
Thank you, Mr. Avella. I want to, before we get to our closing statements, and I'm sorry to interrupt the questions, but I have a couple quick questions, and if we get quick answers, we'll get more.
Is this a lightning round?
It is like a lightning round, exactly. How has this recession affected you personally? I'll start with you, Mr. Avella.
Well, I think my wife and I have cut back on, maybe going out, traveling a little bit, although I haven't gone outside the city since I started running for mayor. But you reduce the expenses. That's what everybody has to do. You sort of tighten the belt a little bit.
Okay, Mr. Thompson?
Cut expenses, try to save more money. As I said, I think all of our neighbors are trying to do the same thing. We're all going through tough times.
How are you each trying to be more green in your personal lives? Start with you, Mr. Thompson.
Well, at this point, riding around being in a hybrid to try and make sure that things are cleaner, making sure that in recycling you're really careful, but also talking to people about being greener and about what it would mean. I think that's important in New York these days.
Well, actually, I'm very proud of the fact that I sort of led the fight to change the zoning law to make it illegal to pave over your front yard so that there would be more green space in the city of New York. And the city Department of City Planning and the mayor actually took my suggestion, and now you have to have green space on people's lawns throughout the entire city. And that's a major thing.
Okay. Both of you, thank you very much, and thank you to the questioners, too. They're really good questions. Each candidate will now have a minute for a closing statement. We're going to begin with Mr. Avella.
Well, first of all, let me thank Channel 7, Campaign Finance Board, the League of Women Voters, and all the sponsors of tonight's debate. It's been a pleasure to be here. You know, the debate here tonight is about the Democratic primary. We all believe, as Democrats, that it's time for Mike Bloomberg to go. So the clear decision for Democrats next Tuesday is who's going to be the best candidate to beat Mike Bloomberg. And I think our campaign has the only shot to beat Mike Bloomberg. We are the real David against Goliath. And unfortunately, my opponent, and this is nothing personal, believe me, it's nothing personal, has the pension issue, has the slush fund issue, the fact that he was head of the Board of Education. All of these issues, in my opinion, Mike Bloomberg is just waiting for commercial after commercial. Our campaign is about real change and real reform. Not only giving people more power in their own community to plan and develop, stopping the real estate industry from overdevelopment, stopping them from harassing tenants and raising tenants' rates, stopping them from kicking out small business, but also reforming the campaign finance program in this city and eliminating, once and for all, the huge influence of big money in this city.
Mr. Avella, thank you. Mr. Thompson, your closing statement.
Again, I'd like to thank the Campaign Finance Board, Channel 7, and our sponsors this evening for giving us this opportunity to speak directly to the people of New York City. For the last 8 years, we have had a wealthy Republican mayor who is focused on the rich and powerful. The rest of us, middle class and working New Yorkers, continue to struggle and are getting squeezed each and every day. Whether it is rising property taxes, assessments, sales tax, water rates, the MTA fares, it's harder and harder for each of us to make do each and every day. We need a change. We need someone who's going to stand up for average, regular New Yorkers. We need someone who understands the struggles that we go through and the challenges that we face each and every day. We need someone who's going to stand up and fight for us. I'm Bill Thompson. I'm a native New Yorker, and I believe that we can do much better.
Gentlemen, thank you both. A lively debate, very interesting, and we thank you. We hope we gave the voters some information and some knowledge to take to the voting booth. That wraps up our debate tonight.